Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
World powers increase pressure on Iran. Elections in Sudan give their economy a boost. And Syria denies supplying Scuds to Hezbollah. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
The French ambassador to the UN, Gerard Araud, reiterated that the 6 leading countries are in agreement over new sanctions on Tehran, adding that the ambassadors of these countries will be discussing the details. The new Iran-proposed sanctions, which have not been approved yet, are based on a United States draft resolution that calls for imposing sanctions on the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and taking other measures to target revenues generated by the sale of Iranian weapons, energy, and naval activities.
The ambassadors of the 5 permanent countries at the UN Security Council, plus Germany, ended the 3-hour talks which were held at the headquarters of the American delegation at the UN. The French ambassador announced that the 6 countries are in agreement over imposing sanctions and that they're discussing the details.
The 6 countries are in an agreement to impose the sanctions. We are now talking about the details and we have made progress. Of course, we will hold more meetings.
The Chinese ambassador reiterated the importance of this round of talks.
We face an important round of talks, and we will focus on a diplomatic option.
After this round of talks ended, the same Chinese ambassador said that it was constructive. That same description was also given by the British and Russian permanent representatives at the UN.
They were constructive discussions, and we will meet soon.
Similar statements were issued by the American envoy, who hosted the talks at the head office of her delegation at the UN. She wants to impose quick and tough sanctions on Iran. However, China and Russia are hoping that diplomatic means will convince Tehran to sit at the negotiation table. If Iran refuses to negotiate, then Moscow and Beijing might be willing to agree on new sanctions, but not as tough as the ones demanded by the West. Through 5 levels of sanctions, the West wants to stop what it describes as the Iranian nuclear program. First, strengthening the existing sanctions that ban the sale of weapons to Iran. Second, imposing sanctions against Iranian Revolutionary Guards and their institutions. Third, imposing sanctions on Iran's energy sector. Fourth, strengthening sanctions on the financial sector. And fifth, freezing the accounts of those who support the Iranian nuclear program and ban them from traveling. Many diplomats do not believe that the UN Security Council will vote on the resolution before July 2010 to avoid disturbing the nuclear conference, which will be held at the UN next month. This will also save Lebanon from any embarrassment, since it will preside over the UN Security Council in May, and its government imposes sanctions on Iran. Talal Al-Hajj, Al-Arabiya, New York.
Iran says Israel is the root cause of the main problems in the Middle East.
Israel is the main source of many regional problems, and with the possession of nuclear warheads equal to the number of warheads in Britain's arsenal, Israel has always been a main source of threat.
Foreign Minister Mottaki has said Israel resorts to military aggression against countries in the region whenever it feels necessary. He said, however, that Israel's capitulation has begun with its military defeats in Lebanon in 2006 and again in the Gaza Strip in 2009. Mottaki also said Iran is committed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and welcomes commitment to the accord by other countries. He has made the comments in Tehran during a meeting with his counterpart from the Central African Republic. Now, a Turkish soldier has been killed and 2 others wounded in fighting with Kurdish rebels in the country's southeast. Clashes erupted during an army operation against the separatist Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, in Batman province. The Turkish army killed 2 PKK rebels in clashes in the neighboring province of Sirte on Wednesday. At around the end of winter, PKK rebels moved out of their mountainous hideouts to conduct operations in Turkey and neighboring Iraq. The PKK is listed as a terrorist group by Turkey and much of the international community. The group took up arms against Ankara in 1984. The conflict has so far claimed about 45,000 lives.
Story, the Israeli security establishment remains concerned that a terrorist organization is trying to kidnap an Israeli tourist from one of the coastal resorts in the Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptian army also launched an intensive effort to prevent a kidnapping and sharply increased its security deployment. The Counter-Terrorist Bureau in the Prime Minister's office said there is specific intelligence information about immediate plans to abduct an Israeli to Gaza. Those planning the abduction are thought to be working under Hamas instruction and funding. Due to the high alert, the Counterterrorism Bureau released a strong statement last night calling on all Israeli tourists in Sinai to return home immediately. Families of Israelis in Sinai have been asked to contact loved ones and inform them of the travel warning. As of midday, an estimated 650 Israelis took heed of the warning and returned to Israel by way of the Taba border crossing. Despite earlier travel warnings, departures to Sinai are up 36% compared to last year, and some 69,000 Israelis visited Sinai during the recent Passover holiday. Currently, there are an estimated 500 Israelis in Sinai.
On the first day we went to Cairo, and then the second day we went to Luxor, and yesterday was our third day of the trip. We went to Sinai, and the day we went to Sinai was the day that they gave the official warnings and everything, when everything happened.
And what's happening?
So we're only in Sinai for a few hours. When we got there, I opened up the laptop and see all my emails, the news, and everything was very, you know, everything was going crazy, and my parents were phoning me, and my family were phoning me, are you okay? Is everything okay? So we got very scared, and we booked a taxi for the morning, and we came straight back.
Well, there have been quite a few alerts. I would call upon all Israelis and other tourists to heed to these alerts and not to go there. Unfortunately, we see that the Hamas, aided by Iran and Hezbollah, is trying to infiltrate also to the Sinai and to other areas. And this is something that we have to live with, but I would take very seriously the calls not to travel right now.
In a related story, operators of smuggling tunnels along the Gaza-Egypt border in Rafah claim that Hamas rulers have ordered the immediate shutdown of the underground passageways. Gaza sources said the decision to close the tunnels was in response to an urgent request from Egyptian security services following warnings of planned terror attacks and kidnapping in the Sinai Peninsula. The sources stressed that the closure of the tunnels was temporary, adding that Hamas feared Israel would bomb the tunnels if they did not close them down. The illegal tunnels are used for smuggling weapons into Gaza for attacks against Israel, as well as for bringing in food, clothing, and other goods used by the 1.5 million Arabs living in the largely blockaded territory. New regulations for illegal residents of the West Bank went into effect this week. The Palestinians are calling it ethnic cleansing, while Israeli officials insist that only a few dozen people will be affected. More in this report.
Officers in the Central Command today vigorously denied that the IDF was planning to carry out mass deportations of Palestinians from the West Bank. They said that the charges were ridiculous. The officers were referring to the uproar that erupted late yesterday over the new residency regulations, which the Palestinians claim gives the army almost unlimited power concerning whom to deport. For example, the amended orders, they say, defined infiltrator as anyone living in the West Bank without a valid permit. Palestinian leaders quickly took the baton and once again brandished the slogan of apartheid, claiming that Jerusalem was intending to create Bantustans in the West Bank.
This is an Israeli official declaration that its occupation of 43 years is going down the drain towards an apartheid system, because that's the official translation, and that's the only translation of this Israeli decision.
These permits are now required, were never required before, therefore no one has them and shouldn't be required to live in their own home and their own land.
The IDF officers explained that the new regulations did make some changes, such as allowing the person 72 hours to appeal a deportation order, rather than the immediate expulsion that was in effect up to now. They said that the changes were actually formulated to facilitate improved due process.
Talking about a handful, less than 10 cases a year of people who have entered the West Bank with a visa and whose visa has expired. Having overstayed their visas, they're liable for repatriation. But again, this could only affect a handful of people, and this can only take place under the supervision and review of a court of law. So all the allegations to the effect that Israel is somehow planning to expel Palestinians and all these ridiculous rumors are nothing but this, ridiculous rumors, and serious people should not be bothered by it.
In Cairo last night, the Arab League held an emergency session calling for urgent action to prevent Israel from putting the decision into effect. The Syrian delegation went as far as to accuse Israel of ethnic cleansing, and Arab League Secretary General Amr Moussa warned Israel of dire consequences.
Syria has strongly denied accusations by Israel that it provided Hezbollah with Scud missiles. Israeli military officials claim that Damascus transferred the missiles without launchers to Hezbollah in the past 2 months. According to Israeli military sources, the transfer alters the balance of power that exists between Hezbollah and Israel and poses a serious threat to all Israeli cities and installations, including the Dimona nuclear reactor. Our correspondent, Farouk Assad, reports from Jerusalem.
Israel is not taking Syria's dismissal of having supplied Scud missiles to Hezbollah too seriously. Israeli officials escalated the tone of their threats against Syria. Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak warned of the danger of the Scud missile transfer from Syria to Hezbollah. Barak added that the transfer undermines the balance of power and threatens regional stability, hinting that Israel's response will be delivered by the Israeli Air Force.
Israel's fear stems from the fact that the transfer of these missiles to Hezbollah aims to disrupt the stability along the Israel-Lebanese borders, as well as undermine Lebanon's stability by strengthening the allies of Damascus and Beirut.
For Israel, the transfer of long-range Scud missiles to Hezbollah will alter and perhaps overturn the balance of powers in the region.
Advanced Scud missiles have close to a 700-kilometre range. Having said that, in the event of a conflict with Hezbollah, these missiles are capable of transforming all of Israel into a battlefront. Israel has hinted all along that any shift in the balance of power with Hezbollah will lead to serious consequences.
Israel said that it's not interested in waging a war with Hezbollah anytime soon, but has left that option open. Israel has placed its army on high alert along the Lebanese border. It also conducted military trainings and test-fired advanced weaponry and equipment capable of transmitting rapid information to the Israeli forces deployed at the Lebanese border. Israel has not ruled out the war option. All Israeli military and political eyes are now focusing on the north, along the border with Lebanon. Farouk Assad, Dubai TV, Occupy Jerusalem. Today marks Sudan's fifth and final day of elections, with voting centers getting ready to close their doors in all 25 states and begin the ballot count. On this final day of elections, low voter turnout was reported in the vast majority of Sudanese states, not much different than the previous days. Our correspondent Taher Al-Mardi examines the Sudanese election process in the following report from Khartoum.
في اليوم الخامس والأخير من الانتخابات العامة في السودان
On this fifth and final day of the Sudanese general elections, voter turnout was fairly low, not much different than the previous day. In the state of Khartoum, the streets seem calm as everyone is waiting for the closure of the polling centers and the start of the ballot count. This is Sudan's first multi-party elections in nearly 25 years. It's also the first election to witness technical and administrative difficulties. Sudanese voters cast their ballots in 8 geographic districts in the north and 12 in the south, starting with the presidential elections and ending with the election of the state councils. Over the past 5 days, the Sudanese opposition strongly criticized the election process, saying that errors and violations that took place during the voting process rendered the elections illegitimate. The opposition also accused international observers, especially the Carter Center for Election Monitoring, of bias in favor of the Sudanese ruling regime. On this final day of polling, the Sudanese National Election Commission, the NEC, said that the mistakes committed during the past few days have been corrected. The NEC added that it will suspend the elections in several districts, with polling to resume in 60 days. Based on reports gathered from various Sudanese institutions, the Sudan Council of Voluntary Agencies has given a reassuring evaluation of the election process.
Generally speaking, calm has dominated the voting process in various election districts. There have been no reports of serious quarrels or altercations, except for minor commotions between some of the parties. The situation was contained before spiraling out of control.
شرفت مرحلة الاقتراع بالنسبة للانتخابات السودانية على نهايتها.
The Sudanese election is nearing its end. Meanwhile, rival candidates are cautiously waiting for tomorrow, when the vote count begins. Tahir al-Mardi, Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
The Sudanese ruling National Congress Party said that 9 of its members have been killed and 5 others have been wounded in a confrontation that ensued at a voting center in Bahr el-Ghazal state.
The head of the Raja Town Council in the state said that the incident is not related to the elections and described it as a family feud. This comes on the final day of the elections that started last Sunday.
شهد قطاع الخدمات في السودان انتعاشا ملحوظا خلال الشهرين الماضيين على خلفية الانتخابات التي تجرى حاليا في البلاد.
Sudan's service sector witnessed a notable boost in the past 2 months due to the elections. There has been an increase in hotel occupancy rates and car rentals. According to estimates, revenue generated by the tourism industry increased by 80% in comparison to last year.
80% من متوسط نسبة الإشغال السنوية كل عام.
Usually, the first destination of tourists in any country is the place where they will be staying. Therefore, one can say that the hotel industry has greatly benefited during the elections. A spokesman for the Coral Hotel said that the economic boost is important due to its timing. This time a year is usually slow because of that high temperature. Usually, Sudanese nationals tend to spend their yearly vacations at this time in other countries.
أكيد طبعا في يعني انتعاش في القطاع الفندقي عموما في الخرطوم.
Of course, the hotel industry has benefited, especially the Coral Hotel, because most of the media organizations and international observers stayed here. The restaurants were busy as well.
الفاريتي بالنسبة للضيوف بتاعين الانتخابات عموما.
Others benefited also, since guests that are staying here would venture out and try other restaurants.
When the guests leave the hotel to do anything, the first thing they think about is transportation. They will definitely need comfortable cars and good drivers in order for them to complete their tasks on time.
ارتفعت نسبة الإيجارات ارتفعت خاصة في الفترة اللي قبل الانتخابات بيومين.
The number of cars rented increased, especially during the 2 days before the elections on April 8th and 9th.
8 9 10 فالكيرف بتاع أو المعدل بتاع الإيجارات.
Car rentals sharply increased. Almost all of the available cars were rented.
100%.
لكن الانتعاشة الحالية
However, the recent economic boom is confined to a large extent to Khartoum. Services here are better than those in other states. In addition, Khartoum is Sudan's political center.
لاحظنا أن ارتفاع دخول الفنادق في شهر مارس وشهر أبريل بشكل كبير جدا.
We noticed that hotel revenue significantly increased in March and April by more than 80% in comparison to last year.
حتى الآن الإحصائية التي وصلت إلينا من كافة المصادر التي نتعامل معها زادت الدخول.
According to the numbers that we have received from different sources, the tourism proceeds increased by $3 million.
دولار كفائدة وكنسبة إدخال حدثت في هذه المنشآت.
الانتخابات السودانية جذبت حتى اللحظة.
The Sudanese elections have brought no less than 350 international journalists, in addition to 840 international observers from the United States, the European Union, the Arab League, the African Union, as well as China, which played a part in the democratic process. Adel Mahjoub, BBC Al Khartoum.
BBC Al Khartoum.
The Red Crescent in the province of Wasat organized a wide-scale educational campaign to inform the residents about the unexploded landmines and shells from the wars in Iraq. The campaign included a large number of seminars held in different areas of the province, during which people were educated on how to recognize explosive devices and how to safely deal with them. We leave you with Riyad Al-Adalili.
Almost every spring, a number of border area residents lose their lives or their limbs due to landmines. In the winter, a large quantity of landmines is carried by floodwaters to roads and grazing fields. The number of shepherds disabled by these landmines increases every year. Al-Shihab, Sheikh Saad, Badra, Zurbatia, and other border villages have become a large cache of landmines and other war remnants, available for anyone to take for free. People lacking a conscience use these war remnants as ammunition to make explosive devices that they use to kill people in Baghdad and the rest of Iraq. These landmine fields have become a source of death and terrorism.
These fields have become warehouses for ammunition and explosives, probably large enough to blow up half of Iraq.
For the past few years, many humanitarian organizations have demanded that these fields, which contain numerous landmines and war remnants, be cleared. However, despite all the efforts exerted to achieve that end, nothing has happened. The Red Crescent in the province of Wasat organized a campaign to educate people about war remnants. The campaign took place in a number of areas in the province. In many public areas, seminars and photo exhibits were held and leaflets were distributed. In addition, informative signs were placed near dangerous zones.
During the campaign, posters were distributed in schools and in the countryside, which contained many landmines and war remnants. We placed warning signs near dangerous areas to inform people not to get close to them.
We held this exhibit to get the attention of Iraqi officials to focus on the issue of war remnants and the injuries and suffering they are causing, especially to farmers.
Millions of landmines are spread throughout dozens of border villages. Piles of explosives were left in many residential homes. This exhibit is an alarm bell to policymakers who refuse to listen to the voices that tell stories of deformed bodies every spring. Al-Furat, Riyad, Al-Adalili, Wasat. Over the past week, the Iraqi resistance continued to carry out its heroic operations against the U.S.-led occupation forces across various parts of Iraq, inflicting heavy casualties and damage.
This week showed mixed progress.
Amidst the painful blows of the Iraqi resistance, not a day goes by in Iraq without having the occupation forces desperately pleading for help. The resistance has transformed Iraq into a gravesite for the occupation forces. Over the past week, heroes of the Iraqi resistance continued to defend their homeland by unleashing a new wave of exceptional operations. The Ansar al-Islam group, a faction affiliated with the Iraqi resistance, claimed responsibility for a bomb attack that targeted a U.S. military vehicle in the city of Kirkuk, the administrative center of Tamim province, destroying the Humvee and killing or injuring all those on board. In another related development, a car bomb targeting a U.S. military convoy exploded in the area of Taji, north of Baghdad, inflicting heavy casualties among the occupation forces and substantially damaging a military vehicle. In addition, a roadside bomb targeting a U.S. military convoy exploded in the city of Bakuba, the capital of the governorate of Diyala, inflicting substantial damage to one of the vehicles. In the province of Qadisiyah, a roadside bomb targeting a U.S. military vehicle exploded in the area of Somer, north of Diwaniyah, damaging the tires of the vehicle. There was no immediate information on the number of casualties due to the tight curfew that was imposed by the U.S. occupation forces in the area. These forces will not be able to rest in their fortified bases, as they are increasingly submitted to the heavy shelling by the Iraqi resistance. The 20th Revolution Brigades, an armed faction of the Jihad and Reform Front, and a member of the Consolidated Commission of Authorizing Factions, claimed responsibility for the shelling of a U.S. military base in northern Iraq. It was an accurate and direct hit. Furthermore, 2 mortar shells were fired at the former headquarters of the Iraqi General Security Agency in the Baladiat neighborhood east of Baghdad, now home to a U.S. occupation military base. There was no immediate information available on the number of casualties or damage due to a news ban issued by the occupation forces. Elsewhere in Iraq, members of the Iraqi resistance fired 2 Katyusha rockets at the U.S. Echo military base in the province of Qadisiyah. There were no immediate reports of casualties or damage. Meanwhile, the U.S. occupation army acknowledged that 2 of its soldiers were killed and 5 others were wounded in clashes with members of the resistance in northern Iraq. The resistance continues to carry out its operations in the land of the 2 rivers, marking a great odyssey written by the honorable sons of Iraq, who sacrificed themselves for the sake of Iraq, a country with no foreign troops.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible from support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news. Read our blog. Get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs, programs which connect you to the world.